Imagine waking up tomorrow. Your city is silent. Fuel stations are empty. Factories stop. Flights are canceled. And governments begin closing schools and offices, all because of a 33-kilometer-wide waterway in the Middle East. A place so small that on a map it looks like a thin blue line. But that thin line controls the lifeline of the global economy. That place is the Strait of Hormuz, and today it sits at the center of one of the most dangerous geopolitical confrontations in decades. The growing war involving Iran, the United States, and Israel is now threatening this narrow passage. If it closes, the consequences could shake every country on Earth, from Washington to Beijing to Islamabad. Because through this narrow channel flows about 20% of the world's oil supply every single day. And right now, the world is asking one terrifying question. What happens if the Strait of Hormuz shuts down? The Strait of Hormuz lies between Iran to the north and Oman and the UAE to the south. At its narrowest point, the strait is only about 33 kilometers wide. Yet through this narrow corridor travels one of the greatest flows of energy on Earth. Every single day, around 20 million barrels of oil pass through this waterway. That is roughly 1/5 of all oil consumed globally. Tankers loaded with crude oil leave the Persian Gulf from countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and nearly all of them must pass through this one choke point. There is no realistic alternative route capable of handling such massive volumes. Energy analysts call it the most important oil choke point in the world. And if anything happens here, the shock waves travel across the entire global economy. Now imagine this critical route suddenly becoming a battlefield. That is exactly what experts fear today. The conflict between Iran and the U.S.-Israel alliance has escalated dramatically. Military strikes, retaliatory attacks, and threats from both sides. Iran has long warned that if its territory or oil infrastructure is attacked, it could block the Strait of Hormuz. And even a temporary disruption would be catastrophic, because global energy markets are extremely sensitive to instability in this region. Already, tensions have reduced shipping traffic dramatically. Reports show that tanker traffic through the strait has fallen by more than 90% in some periods during the crisis. Tankers are waiting offshore. Insurance costs for ships have skyrocketed, and some companies are refusing to sail through the region entirely. The importance of the Strait of Hormuz cannot be overstated, because in many ways it represents the beating heart of the global energy system. Every day, massive oil tankers pass through this narrow corridor connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea and the wider world. On the surface, the waterway may appear calm and ordinary, but beneath that calm lies an enormous geopolitical weight. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil consumption flows through this single maritime passage, making it the most strategically important oil choke point on the planet. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates depend heavily on this route to export their energy resources to global markets, particularly to Asian economies that rely on imported oil to sustain their industries and transportation networks. For decades, international shipping lanes here have been carefully monitored by naval forces because even a brief disruption could trigger a chain reaction in global markets. Energy traders, governments, and military planners all understand that stability in this region is directly linked to global economic stability. When tensions rise around the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices tend to react immediately, often climbing sharply as markets begin to anticipate possible supply disruptions. Even rumors of instability can create panic in financial markets because energy is deeply interconnected with every major sector of the global economy. If oil supply slows or becomes uncertain, transportation costs rise, electricity prices rise, food costs increase, airline travel becomes more costly, manufacturing slows down, and political tensions can grow among countries competing for limited fuel supplies. For developing economies that depend heavily on imported fuel, the situation becomes even more fragile. Countries like Pakistan, India, and many others across Asia rely on steady flows of oil from the Gulf region to power their industries, run their electricity generation systems, and keep transportation networks operating smoothly. When geopolitical tensions threaten the security of this narrow passage, policymakers in these countries begin preparing for possible disruptions, sometimes considering emergency economic measures to protect fuel reserves and manage potential shortages. This is why the Strait of Hormuz is often described not merely as a geographic feature, but as a strategic pressure point in global politics. Control over this waterway has long been viewed as a powerful geopolitical lever, and throughout modern history, various crises in the Middle East have raised fears that shipping through the strait could be restricted or even blocked. Such a scenario would have far-reaching consequences that extend far beyond the region itself. A prolonged disruption could tighten global oil supplies dramatically, push energy prices to extreme levels, and trigger inflation across multiple continents. The ripple effects would be felt in stock markets, trade routes, airline industries, and national economies around the world. For this reason, the security of the Strait of Hormuz remains one of the top priorities for global powers, regional governments, and international energy organizations, all of whom recognize that the stability of this narrow maritime corridor plays a crucial role in maintaining balance within the modern global economy. For the global economy, this is the equivalent of cutting off the arteries of energy supply. The moment Hormuz is threatened, oil markets react instantly. Prices surge, markets panic, factories begin calculating potential shutdowns. Energy analysts warn that if the strait is fully blocked, oil prices could shoot above $100 or even $150 per barrel, and that would trigger a chain reaction. Transportation becomes expensive, electricity prices rise, food costs increase, airline travel becomes more costly, manufacturing slows down. That is why economists call Hormuz a global economic shock scenario. In fact, recent tensions have already pushed oil prices sharply upward and created fears of a major supply crunch. But the biggest impact is not the United States, it is Asia, because over 80% of the oil moving through Hormuz is destined for Asian economies. Countries like China, India, Japan, South Korea, and Pakistan depend heavily on this route, and if it shuts down, Asia could face the biggest economic shock. Among the countries watching this crisis with the most concern, Pakistan stands near the top of the list. Why? Because Pakistan imports most of its oil from Gulf countries, and almost all of that oil travels through the Strait of Hormuz. If the strait closes, Pakistan's energy supply could be disrupted almost immediately. Experts warn that fuel shortages could appear, prices could skyrocket, and the economy could face severe stress. In fact, fuel prices in Pakistan have already surged due to tensions in the region. Industry officials warn that diesel and crude prices could rise sharply, triggering inflation across the country. Pakistan currently holds only limited fuel reserves. Some estimates suggest the country maintains about 25 days of petroleum stocks. That means prolonged disruption could quickly create shortages. Factories would slow down, transportation costs would explode, and inflation would surge across the entire economy. Energy crises do not remain limited to fuel stations. They affect every part of daily life. If oil supply is severely disrupted, governments may take emergency measures. These could include reducing working hours, limiting transportation, closing schools temporarily, reducing industrial activity. During major fuel shortages in the past, some countries have even introduced fuel rationing systems. Imagine a situation where buses stop running, electricity outages increase, factories close, exports decline, and unemployment rises. That is the type of scenario governments are trying to avoid. And it all depends on one critical factor: whether the Strait of Hormuz remains open. If Hormuz closes completely, the consequences would ripple worldwide. Europe would face higher energy costs, Asia would experience supply shortages, global inflation would surge, shipping routes would become longer and more expensive, and financial markets could panic. Even countries far from the Middle East would feel the shock, because energy sits at the center of the global economy. When oil supply drops, everything becomes more expensive: food, transportation, electricity, manufacturing. In the modern world, oil is still the fuel that powers the planet, and the Strait of Hormuz is the narrow gate controlling that fuel. For decades, military planners have called the Strait of Hormuz the most dangerous choke point in global energy security, because it is narrow, easy to mine, and surrounded by heavily armed forces. Iran's navy, U.S. warships, regional militaries, all operating in extremely close proximity. One mistake, one miscalculation, one missile, and the world could face a full-scale energy crisis. That is why world leaders are watching this region with intense concern. Because if the Strait of Hormuz closes, it will not just be a Middle Eastern crisis, it will become a global economic emergency. And the question the world is asking tonight is simple: will diplomacy keep this vital passage open, or are we about to witness the most dangerous oil crisis of the 21st century?